One of the most important parts of becoming a successful writer has to do with helping your reader understand how your sentences relate to one another and how the larger ideas that are present in your writing relate to one another as well. So this lesson will focus on transitions. If you recall the idea chunks and paragraph lessons, transitions are one of the main elements in an idea chunk. So this lesson will focus not only on how to transition between idea chunks, but how to transition between sentences within paragraphs and within idea chunks to really help your reader. Oftentimes, writers express their frustration with transitions as a matter of flow. This is an ambiguous word that no one is quite sure what it means when it comes to writing, but in some ways it's very accurate. If you think about flow, it basically means things are connected. There's some sort of fluidity or a stream. There's a shared understanding between different parts, right? It all works together very smoothly. But I think what we're talking about when we talk about flow is our inability to transition between sentences and ideas. Without flow, without transitions, writing becomes very, very choppy, difficult to understand, and misleading. The first part that I want to focus on has to do with transitions between sentences. Remember, you are writing for a reader. More than likely, you have spent an inordinate amount of time researching your topic and drafting and trying to get your different ideas out on paper, which means that when you start to write, things seem very, very apparent to you. However, keep in mind that your reader probably isn't as familiar with the material as you are. Therefore, you need to really emphasize transitions to show how your ideas relate to one another. So paragraphs and idea chunks without transitions between sentences sound very disjointed and make the transmission or comprehension of ideas extremely difficult. I want you to recall the different elements of an idea chunk. Remember, you have a topic sentence that forecasts what the idea chunk or paragraph will be about. You're making a claim, which sometimes is embedded within the topic sentence, but oftentimes will refine or distill the idea in the topic sentence to focus more on your specific argument. And of course, if you're going to make a claim, you have to provide evidence. And then after you provide evidence, you really need to explain how the evidence proves the claim. And then after that, you're going to transition. Now, remember, this isn't a plug-and-play idea. This is not an algorithm. This is a heuristic. It's not a hard and fast rule. What I want to focus on, though, is the transition part today. The reason I'm recalling these different elements of the idea chunk is because if you are aware of what you're trying to do within a paragraph or within an idea chunk, you will more than likely know how to transition better. Right? So if you know that you're in the explication phase, you can more readily find the transition phrases and words that you need. So let's imagine that you've written a topic sentence and now need to refine the topic sentence to express a claim. I've gone ahead and written a paragraph for you. So here's the topic sentence. Contingent labor in higher education has expanded rapidly in the last 20 years. If you don't know what contingent labor is, it's best to think of it like part-time labor. You don't have like a contract, you're not a tenured professor, you sort of teach on a semester-to-semester basis. So my topic sentence is laying out the focus or the big picture idea of what I'm looking at. I'm looking at contingent labor, I'm looking at higher education, and I'm looking at how it's expanded. Now I need to distill that topic sentence to reflect the claim I want to make. And when I say distill, I just mean I'm narrowing it. I'm finding the niche argument that I want to make. So you can see here in the claim, I'm saying, however, few disciplines have capitalized on adjunct professors as heavily as college composition. Okay, so I've got however in red there because it's a transition word. I don't want my readers to think that I'm going to focus on all of contingent labor in higher education or how all of them have expanded. I'm interested in the one that has capitalized on it the most. College composition. So the word however there helps my reader understand where I'm going. However is a word of difference. Anytime you read the word however, you know that the writer is shifting away and is either disagreeing with what came before it or showing some sort of difference or contrasting point. Okay, so I've got my topic sentence, I've got my claim, Now I need evidence to support this claim. All right, so I'm going to read this next little section to you, but keep in mind I've got the transition phrases and words highlighted in red, which help you, the reader, understand how these different clauses relate to one another. So let's begin. As one of the only mandated courses, freshman composition requires a substantial labor force, which should mean it's also one of the most expensive courses for a university to offer, but ironically, it functions at a low cost. This is because colleges and universities hire temporary workers who make far less than their tenured counterparts to meet labor demands. Okay, so let's pull back a little bit and talk about how each one of these transitions works. When I say as one of the only mandated courses, as one of lets my reader know I'm only going to focus on one. There are other mandated courses, but this is the one I'm interested in, right? I can't just begin as a mandated course. That doesn't really help my reader understand the bigger picture. Okay, so the next part says freshman composition requires a substantial labor force. Why? Because it's mandated. Every student has to take it, which means you need a lot of teachers. So the next transition word, which, there is a cause and effect transition. So which is basically saying which creates. Okay, so if freshman composition is mandated, you're going to need a large labor force, which means it should be very expensive. Okay, and then the next transition word, but, shows that I'm disagreeing with the previous supposition. Right? I'm saying if everyone has to take it, it should be there should be a lot of professors, which means it should be very expensive, but it's not. It functions on a very low cost. Okay, and the next phrase that follows that is explanation. This is because. Okay, this is because colleges and universities hire temporary workers. So how does it function at a lower cost? This is because blank. Okay, now if I were to take away those red words, those transition words and phrases, I would have something that reads like this. Contingent labor in higher education has expanded rapidly in the last 20 years. Few disciplines have capitalized on adjunct professors as heavily as college composition. So things are still a little okay there. I think the word however really sets that second sentence up nicely. You'll see though in the next sentences things sort of run together and run into trouble. It's hard to distinguish what the writer is actually arguing. Freshman composition requires a substantial labor force. It's also one of the most expensive courses for a university to offer. Okay, so I'm arguing that you need a large labor force and that it's very expensive. And then the next sentence says, ironically, it functions at a low cost. And then I say, colleges and universities hire temporary workers who make far less than their tenured counterparts. The pieces that connect the ideas together are missing. It's hard to make sense of these sentences because they disagree with one another, because I'm not letting my reader know that one of them is to limit the claim of a preceding sentence or explain how it works. Without those transition words and phrases, the reader is really struggling to make sense of this paragraph. And here's how it reads once they're back in. I won't read it to you again, but you can do that if you want. I want to turn now to how we transition between paragraphs and idea chunks or just ideas within an essay. Remember that paragraphs and idea chunks convey ideas, but those ideas must be linked to support a larger argument. So if you recall the idea chunks lesson, you have a thesis, you have an overriding sort of umbrella that you're operating under that's the larger argument. However, you will have smaller arguments along the way. In order for your reader to understand how you're weaving all of those together, you need to transition between idea chunks. All right, so let's say my first idea chunk has to do with contingent labor as a mainstay in composition, as something that's always a part of composition. And my next idea chunk has to do with college composition as a service course. And when I say service course, I mean something that's not a real discipline or something that people think is just learning a bunch of grammar or how to read something. That's a service course. So those are the two idea chunks I have. Now I need to figure out how I want to transition between these two things. what I want to show you is that transitions can work at the end of an idea chunk or at the beginning of one. So they can work as a way to move from what you've just talked about into the next thing and show how those are related or different, or you can use the topic sentence area as a way to refer back to what you just talked about. All right, so there's the paragraph, all of the words in black. There's the paragraph that I wrote earlier about contingent labor and composition. Okay, so the last little sentence there in red is my transition sentence. So I'm going to read the last two sentences. This is because colleges and universities hire temporary workers who make far less than their tenured counterparts. The rationale behind paying contingent faculty substantially less lies in the supposedly simple nature of the course's content. Now recall, I'm transitioning to an idea chunk that has to do with the false idea that composition is a service course, which basically means it's simple to teach, that it's something anyone can do. You just learn some grammar, throw some sentences together, and you have a perfect essay. So you can see here, I'm connecting the idea, why use a bunch of cheap labor? Well, the rationale behind this has to do with composition being simple in its content. Now I've set up my reader for the next idea, which is hopefully going to dispel the premise that composition is a simplistic discipline or service course. However, you can also use the topic sentence area as a place to transition as well. So I've rewritten the last sentence of the paragraph, and I've used the space of the next paragraph to really create some unity between these two idea chunks. So once again, I'll read the last two sentences of the first paragraph and then the new topic sentence area for the second idea chunk, and we'll see how these work together. This is because colleges and universities hire temporary workers who make far less than their tenured counterparts. But surely there's a guiding philosophy other than cost to the university. While one could argue that such labor practices are unfair, the rationale behind paying contingent faculty substantially less lies in the supposedly simple nature of the course's content. Okay, so I think I'm a fan of the transition sentence in the previous slide, but this hopefully will show you that you can do both. So here I've ended with explaining that colleges use temporary workers. And then what I've done here is say, surely there's something more important than cost. And then I start the next one while saying, sure, one could argue that these labor practices are unfair, but really if you want to know the rationale behind it, it doesn't have to do with cost. It has to do with the supposedly simple nature of the course's content. Okay, so surely there's a guiding philosophy. That's me getting ready to say what that new guiding philosophy is. And then down here, I'm getting in the topic sentence, not only a transition, but a topic sentence that sets up the idea that I'm going to discuss the supposedly simple nature of the course's content. Supposedly being a key word there that will hopefully key my reader in to know that I disagree with that supposition. All right, so here's a recap. We covered not only transitions between the bigger ideas, but also sentence-to-sentence transitions. It's really helpful to think about what you're trying to accomplish with that sentence. What is that sentence purpose? Is it the topic sentence? Is it the claim? Is it a transition sentence? Explication? Evidence? What is it doing? And then you can use words and phrases that help connect those two sentences. Within this unit's course content, on the course website, I have some helpful PDFs for you that have broken down transition words and phrases by what you're attempting to do. So if you're attempting to add or disagree or elaborate on something, in each column there will be different words and phrases that you can use, but they're only helpful to you if you know what you're attempting to do. All right, and we also talked about idea to idea transition. Use transition phrases to link the two idea chunks. You can do that at the end to signal what's coming up next, or you can do it at the end and at the beginning to create a strong bond between the two idea chunks. We will continue to work on this in class. We'll examine not only your writing, but other writing to see how authors use transitions to create flow. Okay, and as always, if something seemed out of place or if I went too quickly, feel free to get in contact with me.